Back in late January 2019, I made a video discussing the dire straits in which Valve's digital card game Artifact has found itself in. At the time, 2 months had elapsed since the game's November 28, 2018 launch, and player count was already looking very rough then. To be more exact, the game's concurrent player count had fallen below the 1,500 mark, and with a peak number of concurrent players at launch having been just a little over 60,000, that meant that the player base had dipped by a whopping 97.5%. But things have only gotten worse since. Looking at Steam charts for the game now, you'll see that the player count has fallen to the mid-hundreds. Here's the average number of players over the last 30 days. You can see right here that the number is now sitting at a measly 600 players. And taking into account that the game had peaked at 60,000, that would mean that as of today, the game's player count has gone down by a whopping 99%. That's right, the number of people playing the game right now amounts to roughly 1% compared to what this game pulled during launch week, its best time period. These figures are bad enough that buying every card in the game now costs a mere $60 in the marketplace compared to $300 back in November, according to an article by website Kotaku, a result of there being a lot of supply for cards but very little demand for them. If it wasn't clear that this game was hanging by a thread before, it sure as hell is now, and it looks like this is something Valve may be coming to terms with as well, judging by recent developments. The following information comes from website Artabuff, who, after having heard that Valve recently laid off 13 employees and terminated some of their contracts, reached out to Richard Garfield, creator of Magic the Gathering and designer of Artifact, to ask about his employment status at Valve. After all, Richard and his company Three Donkeys worked on Artifact at Valve on a contract basis, and with Valve having stated that some contract agreements were terminated, there were questions about whether Richard and his company were among those affected. Richard has confirmed that this is indeed the case by offering the following statement sent to Artabuff in response to the outlet's request for comment. Here's what Richard had to say. Yes, contractors included Three Donkeys, which is me and Scaff Elias. Thanks for the warning about publishing and the offer to keep information private. That won't be necessary. We weren't surprised by the layoffs considering how rocky the launch was. The team was enthusiastic about the game and were confident that they had a good product, but it became clear it wasn't going to be easy to get the game to where we wanted it. The layoff makes sense for a number of reasons. To name a couple, now that the game is out there, time is more critical. So more voices within the team that you have to navigate may not be as good as making less considered decisions faster. Another, the expertise that Three Donkeys brought is less critical after listening to us for 4+ years. Both Scaff and I remain optimistic about the quality of the game and have offered our feedback and advice in an ongoing, gratis capacity, simply because we would like to see the game do as well as we think it can. We enjoyed working with Valve and I was impressed with their relentless focus on the quality of the game and experience being offered to the player. Peace, Richard. From this, Artabuff's article made a number of conclusions, starting with the likelihood that the Artifact team has been significantly downsized, possibly now only being comprised of a skeleton crew with just the necessary staff to keep the game chugging along. Naturally, this raised concerns about what this all means for future updates and content development, with the article pointing out that the game hasn't been updated since January 28, 2019, which is about a month and a half ago as of the publishing of this video. Just as disconcerting is the fact that the official Artifact Twitter page hasn't posted anything since December 21st, 2018, possibly suggesting that upkeep for the game has winded down quite a bit since launch. Another question that the game's few remaining players have is what will become of the $1 million Artifact tournament that was officially announced and mentioned a few times. According to Artabuff, this tournament has been talked about on a number of separate occasions, with Gabe Newell himself having mentioned it during an Artifact press conference back in March 2018 and during the opening ceremony of Dota International back in August 2018, and with a few other developers having brought it up during PAX 2018 the following month on September.
So we heard that there was a $1 million prize that's scheduled for the first quarter of 2019. That's a pretty big amount. How do you think the game's going to do within esports?
Esports is really important for us and also for the fans because,
first of all,
yes,
it's not $1 million total prize. It's $1 million first prize. So the total prize pool is much larger than that.
The tournament was supposed to take place sometime in early 2019, but it's already March and there hasn't been so much as a peep about it. Given the rough place the game's in right now, given how few players are playing the game or are remotely interested in it, it wouldn't be terribly surprising if plans for the tournament ended up getting axed, or at least put on hold until the foreseeable future. It looks like Artifact is currently trapped in something of a downward spiral. The perception that the game is dying will result in fewer players being inclined to spend time and money on it, and in more players leaving, which will only further worsen perception surrounding the game's future prospects, which will in turn result in even less players being willing to invest in the game and even more players leaving, and this vicious cycle will continue until barely any players remain. Adding further to this downward spiral are factors such as long wait times during matchmaking due to low player count, which, combined with a continued lack of communication and assurances in regards to Artifact's future on the part of Valve and the Artifact development team, is making even the most loyal of what little remains of the player base up and leave. And with news now spreading of the team likely having been downsized to a skeleton crew, and with core designers like Richard Garfield having been let go, players and bystanders are only bound to feel even less confident about the game's long-term viability. While a tweet from December 10th, 2018, and patch notes for Artifact's January 28th, 2019 update expressed that the team is in it for the long haul, it sure as hell doesn't feel that way. If anything, all signs seem to be pointing to Valve slowly getting ready to hang up the mantle, cut their losses, and give up on what's looking to be an irrecoverable game. The only way I can see the game making any kind of comeback is if Artifact releases some kind of major game-altering update that will revitalize people's interest again, but even that seems like a long shot at this point. Another avenue Valve could pursue is making Artifact a free-to-play game, as that $20 initial entry fee has been, in my opinion, one of the biggest roadblocks for the struggling title. Frankly, it baffles me that they would even consider making people pay an entry fee to play Artifact when its main competitors have all been pursuing a free-to-play model. This is something that Artifact especially couldn't afford to do as a latecomer of the digital card games genre. Now, those who've been following Artifact's development cycle will know that the project's woes predate its launch. Players' lack of enthusiasm towards this game can be traced as far back as its August 2017 announcement, when a crowd of hopefuls, anticipating that Valve would finally learn to count to 3 and deliver a full-fledged sequel to some of their most beloved franchises, or announce a new high-budget IP that doesn't chase trends, reacted in disappointment when the new game turned out to be a Dota card game, something nobody asked for. It wasn't just attendees who were disillusioned by this. One gander at the teaser trailer's likes to dislikes ratio revealed that sentiment surrounding this announcement was overwhelmingly negative across the board. When Artifact did finally become playable for the general public, players didn't take kindly to how much focus was placed on monetization, especially given it already charged an initial $20. Back when the game initially launched, the only way to obtain new cards was to either pay $2 for a card pack, pay for individual cards sold in the marketplace, or to pay for tickets that allowed you to partake in gauntlet competitions for rewards. A path towards obtaining new cards via gameplay without shelling out extra cash was practically non-existent, and while this was rectified somewhat in a later patch, by then the damage had already been done. Keep in mind, this is a time when the digital card games market is pretty saturated with other titles like Hearthstone, Elder Scrolls Legends, Gwent, and more, so Artifact chose the wrong time to get stingy and make a terrible first impression. There's also the fact that the card game itself garnered a lot of criticism for design flaws, with the core mechanics over-reliance on RNG systems making consistent and satisfying wins difficult, and with the overall slow pacing making matches feel like a drag to play. Going to Artifact's Steam page now will reveal that the most recent user reviews for the game have been overwhelmingly negative, and a lot of those reviews are coming from people who have invested dozens, if not over 100 hours into the game, with many of them having expressed the same sentiments regarding the game's detrimental monetization scheme and gameplay blemishes. So yeah, it doesn't take a genius to see that Artifact's future isn't looking very bright, and that it might not have much of a future unless Valve decides to take some very drastic measures that culminate in what would have to be a miraculous turnaround. But knowing that the company seems to have scaled down Artifact's development team and that Richard Garfield is no longer involved on an official capacity, with the player base being a shadow of what it once was at 1% of its peak, with communication and activity on the developer's end being completely absent, I don't get the sense that Valve is particularly motivated to go beyond keeping Artifact on life support, and I wouldn't be shocked if the company eventually saw it fit to pull the plug on this failure of an endeavor. It's a damn shame, but this is what can happen when a game company starts chasing money-making trends and chases them poorly rather than playing to their strengths and offering products that fans and enthusiasts have been clamoring for. Valve has got a goldmine of franchises in dire need of sequels right underneath their roof, and it's such a waste to see them collecting dust. Then again, Valve as a game development studio has become a shadow of what it once was, with key figures behind the likes of Half-Life, Portal, Left 4 Dead, and whatnot having left the company to pursue greener pastures. With Valve's present lack of passion for their own marquee franchises, and with the company now lacking the manpower responsible for their acclaim and success, perhaps would do best to move forward with the assumption that these beloved IPs will remain forever dormant. These are one man's perspective on the situation anyway. I'd love to hear what your take is on Artifact's current status in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update and discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. To be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.